It cannot be stressed enough how speedrunning at a live event is far different from speedrunning at home. It's somewhat like the difference between working at a corporation and doing the same work remotely from home. You're less worried about your appearance at home, more relaxed at home, and your workspace doesn't have to adhere to anyone's guidelines but your own. Having to pack up part of your speedrunning setup and move it anywhere from a few minutes to several hours down the road, across the country, or even across the ocean is no small feat. I've had to do this several times, usually opting to drive even for events about 1,000 miles away. The road trip becomes something of a speedrun in itself. I've said jokingly before that it's the kind of speedrunning I'm actually good at. I tend to arrive much earlier than the time estimate the GPS gives me. But at one point, one small mistake nearly led to me driving 12 hours to an event and not only missing my run, but paying a fine to the state of Minnesota. It's early in the afternoon on May 8th, 2015, and I've arrived at a convention in Bloomington, Minnesota called Digital Destruction, which in later years would come to be known as 2DCon. I've spent about 12 hours driving here for an event within the event called Midwest Speedfest. While the event has grown to the point that it runs multiple charity marathons every year, which get restreamed in multiple languages, this event was the most humble of humble beginnings. Digital Destruction was more or less one giant game room, and the setup for Midwest Speedfest was a space against a wall about the size of a queen-size bed, consisting of a pair of computers and a television or two with a Yeti microphone on a stand somewhere near whoever was running at the time, and a bunch of chairs scattered around them. There was no dedicated practice space, and the setup regularly had attendees walking directly behind the runners and was only about 20 or 30 feet away from a stage where various music acts would play. But hey, where there's a speedrunning event, there's a way. I head up to the hotel room and unpack, seeing as how I had 2 runs to worry about. The first, roundabout, happens earlier in the day, so I focus on being ready for that, even though the only thing I can use for practice is my laptop, which could only run the game at about half the normal frame rate. I finish that run and go back to the hotel room to unpack my Super Scope for a run of Battle Clash happening later in the day. Whenever I travel with the Super Scope, I remove the scope attachment and wrap it with the rest of the hardware in a towel to help protect it for the trip. Then I pack the game, console, cable, controller, and sensor for the scope together and put that in a separate messenger bag. So you can imagine my surprise when I unpack the Super Scope, then go to my messenger bag and take out the game, console, cables, controller, and the sensor is nowhere to be found. I nearly tear apart my messenger bag and duffel bag looking for it, but apparently I just never packed it. Without that sensor, a Super Scope game cannot be played at all, much less speedrun. The only silver lining is that since Battle Clash is one of the last runs for the day, I still have about 4 or 5 hours to figure out what to do. I explain to the guys running the marathon what's going on and check around the rest of the convention for a sensor, since there are some SNES stations set up, but no one has a Super Scope, let alone a sensor for a Super Scope. Out of desperation, I get my laptop and start looking for any trade-in or retro gaming stores in the area and call each of them to ask if they have any Super Scope sensors. Eventually, I call a store called World of Games. and they say they have 2 sensors, but they don't have a super scope. At this point, I'm willing to take a chance to make the run happen, so I say I'll be there in a bit and hop in my car. When I say a bit, I mean this store is about 20 minutes away, most of that being on the highway. By the time I go there, find the store, buy the hopefully working sensors, and make it back, I'll have maybe an hour or an hour and a half until my run starts. If that. I make it out to World of Games, and the guy behind the counter says they have 2 sensors, but since they don't have a super scope, they cannot test if they're working properly. I'm beyond paranoid about one of them not working and buying the wrong one, so I say screw it and buy both of them, then sprint back to my car and start driving back toward the highway. The location of the store combined with my GPS temporarily failing means I wind up driving down a road that lacked a couple things: houses and speed limit signs. I guess that the speed limit is 50, since that's what the limit would be in my home state for roads like these. As my GPS finds its signal again, a police car drives past me, and in my rearview mirror, I see it do a U-turn no more than 100 feet behind me and flash its lights. And I'm pulled over. The cop comes to my window after a few minutes of waiting, and it's only a minor comfort that he seems to be only a few years older than me. He reveals that the road I thought had a speed limit of 50 actually had a speed limit of 35. If you remember my description of catastrophizing from a previous video, that's what my brain starts doing here. I'm not going to make it back in time for the run. If I do, the sensors won't work. I'm going to get a ticket from a different state. And I don't know how bad that is, but it's definitely not good. Then I have what is either my finest moment or my craziest moment. The officer asks what I was doing speeding on this road. And aside from mentioning that I hadn't seen a speed limit sign since getting on that road, I explain everything about why I'm there. Digital destruction, Midwest Speed Fest, the run, the missing sensor, frantically calling nearby retro stores, the wing and a prayer purchase of the sensors. And as I'm explaining all of this, I have my badge for the event in my left hand and the Super Scope sensors rattling in my right hand. I don't know what my face looked like at the time, but it was probably something like this. The cop goes back to his patrol car, and I'm staring at the clock and the GPS, trying to figure out how much time I'll have when I get back to the event, if any. Finally, the cop comes back to my window and lets me off with a warning. I'm fairly certain he didn't quite understand my explanation, because he wishes me luck at the game tournament. But I'm not going to correct him at this point. I make it back to the event, and between runs, I do a quick test with one of the TVs to see if either of the sensors work. And thankfully, both of them did. Even when attending an event solely as a runner, there are more responsibilities than just the run itself, particularly at any event where runners have to bring their own hardware. This is just one of a few instances when I've had to make an emergency trip to find or buy something to save a run, but it is far and away the most memorable, if only because I learned the single most important speed tech that day: ticket skip.